swear at you, and
I have to raise my right hand and give you my
I think, yes,
The video guy is ready as soon as you are.
I just gave it to him. Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, April 12th, 2022 Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board of Managers meeting. Our first order of business, would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the swearing in of Manager Loney. So Bruce, would you please repeat after me? I, Bruce Loney, do solemnly swear
I, Bruce Loney, solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and of the state of Minnesota,
in the state of Minnesota,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of manager
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of manager
of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District
of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Please sign that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is the public comment period, and not that we have anyone in here, but just to confirm, nobody in here this evening wishes to speak at the public comment period. Seeing none, we're moving on then to the approval of the agenda, and I'm going to confirm with my colleagues, are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, Joni, none, you shook your head. Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0. Thank you. So we're on to other old new business, the programs and projects update. Take it away, Jamie.
Okay, so I'll start with talking about our monitoring and research program. We began installing our stream and lake loggers due to the low water levels from 2021. We had to reposition, deepen, lower, move all our lake logger wells. It's one of those unexpected time-consuming processes. So another challenge that we're facing right now is that those loggers had some bugs in the script where they transmit through cell signal to a server online, and then that finds its way to our website. Currently, we've got that fixed, and those should be updating as of now, but we're likely going to have to work through some technical problems tomorrow. So at the moment, Prior Lake is at 900.2, Spring Lake 910.59, and Pike Lake at 820.16. That Prior Lake level is really similar to what we were seeing right before ice on in November.
Jeff, could you, sorry, before you leave that, could you please clarify what you moved the logger down to? What was it before and what did you move it down to now?
We lowered the logger approximately 3 feet in Prior Lake.
And it was at what before?
Where the sensor hangs, right around 900, a little below 900.
So it's about 897 then?
Right now it's
Roughly?
at right around
Okay.
897.
Thank you.
Yes. Today and this week we're installing pit tag stations. On the left is at the ferric chloride site, and in the right picture is at the Spring Lake connecting channel. That pit station's set up to collect information where carp travel, and we can tell which direction that they're moving. So these pit stations are a real first step in collecting information on where carp are moving and leading towards new spawning grounds. With the warm weekends and a few sunny days we've had, carp are already moving. In this picture, you can see the Arctic Lake outlet in Mud Bay, and there's a whole bunch of carp in the channel. So we set this camera up to monitor that, since it's an opportunistic area for us to remove carp, and so that's going to be first on the list to look at in the mornings. And with ice off occurring today, somewhere around today or yesterday or tomorrow, lake ice off will occur, and we'll be going out open water seining for carp removals. So right now, with the ID on carp aggregation in Mud Bay, that looks like a promising location to start. Otherwise, we'll be out tracking probably later this week.
Okay, and for a project status update, I'm going to start with the Upper Watershed Blueprint feasibility studies. Again, this is the 6 projects that were chosen out of that blueprint study that the board wanted to focus and prioritize on moving forward with. So the Spring West Iron Enhanced Sand Filter feasibility study is complete. Right now, we have 8 different iron enhanced sand filter locations that we can potentially choose. So there are 2 different landowners that have these filters located on their property. So the board is going to meet to determine kind of the best method for contacting landowners and how we want to move forward with that. This will be done probably within this month or next month. These projects, these filters can reduce between 70 to 140 pounds of phosphorus per year, and the cost for that, each pound of phosphorus, is between $350 and $950 per pound, depending on which filter we move forward with. The Sutton Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter is also complete. We will be touching base with a landowner later this year. He has some things that he has to determine before we meet with him. So we'll meet with him later this year, but the project itself might not actually happen for a couple years if it does decide to go forward. But this project is capable of reducing between 180 and 530 pounds of phosphorus per year, depending on how much flow goes through that filter each year. So that would be approximately $220 to $280 per pound of phosphorus captured. The other project that we're working on actively right now is the Buck Wetland Enhancement Feasibility Study. So we had a landowner meeting last week, and the purpose of that was to get feedback from the landowners on what they like, maybe dislike about the wetland, what they would like to see with a potential wetland enhancement, any concerns they might have. So we noted all of their comments, and we will start running models and creating project ideas based on their feedback. And then once we have those models and projects in place, we'll meet again with them to kind of run that by them to see if any of those projects might be capable of following through. And then there's 3 other projects: the Swamp Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter Feasibility Study, the Ditch 13 Treatment System, and the Buck Channel Chemical Treatment System. Those haven't exactly been started yet, but we are going to move forward with trying to get some grant funding from Bowser to fund those feasibility studies. So we'll be meeting next month to discuss that. And after that, we'll be soliciting proposals for those feasibility studies. Some other projects that we're working on in the upper watershed that aren't a result of the Upper Watershed Blueprint project, but just that we've been focusing on is the Sutton Lake Management Plan. We have now met with the landowners and we've met with the DNR, and it's time to meet with the board to discuss what we've learned through all those meetings and kind of decide how we want to move forward with that. So we plan to do that within the next month or two. And the Sutton Lake Outlet Modification Project, nothing really to update since last month. We just are waiting for vegetation establishment before closing out that grant. And also no changes in the ferrochloride treatment facility project, potentially updating that. So we'll be soliciting for proposals this summer as well. This is a new slide that I added. Soil and Water Conservation Districts, so SWCD projects within the upper watershed. So soil and water, we contract with soil and water to do conservation practices. And we kind of have a set guidelines that if these projects meet those guidelines, that they move forward and install and move forward with projects. So the difference, kind of one of the differences with this is usually that these are landowner brought to soil and water by the landowner, people that are interested in getting projects on the ground. So these are all projects that are ready to go and will be completed this year. We already talked about the gully stabilization. So construction is expected to begin later this summer, and that project will reduce around 8 pounds of phosphorus per year and costs around $118 per pound of phosphorus captured. So we meet every quarter to discuss these projects that landowners apply for. We call it a cost share batching project or meeting. And so we decided out of the ones that applied that we would move forward with a native grass planting, which is going to be planting 5 acres of cropland to native grasses. And this will reduce about 5 pounds of phosphorus per year and cost around $190 per pound of phosphorus captured. And then there's a new field that's going to be applying cover crops. So that's 7 new acres to be planted with cover crops this year, and that will reduce around 13 pounds of phosphorus per year and cost only $18 per pound of phosphorus captured. And then I just learned that there is another, that they'd been confronted by a landowner about a potential wetland restoration, so I don't have a lot of information about that yet, but we're excited to look into that project potentially over the next couple months. And lastly, projects in the Prior Lake Outlet Channel. We are obtaining easements to fix the bank erosion along the channel. That bidding will be soon, and we'll have the construction starting later this summer or fall. We did just complete the sediment removal in segment 5, so that is substantially complete. And we're almost ready to move forward with televising the outlet pipe, which is just to determine if there's any issues or repairs that are needed within the outlet pipe. So that will be occurring within the next month or two as well. Any questions about the projects before we move on?
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, the wetland restoration project, would that be something we could do a wetland bank in, or is it just, what's the thought on that?
Like this one, the Soil and Water Conservation District wetland project?
Yeah, is this with the SWCD, or is this something we're doing?
Yeah, that's with the SWCD. Like I said, I just learned about this today. I don't know if Troy or if you know if this could potentially be a wetland banking project, or is it too soon to say? If you want to pop up and answer that.
Troy Kufal, Scott Soil and Water. So the answer to the question would be not likely. Typically, a wetland restoration for banking purposes would need to be at least 10 acres in size, and this is about 6. It's possible that if you added a sufficient amount of buffer, you could get up to 10, but buffers only count as like a 1% per 4, so you need 4 acres to get 1 acre of credit. So it's not likely going to be feasible at this size.
The reason I bring that up, I know I've talked to Nick Monastro of Prior Lake, and it's been on some of the permits, they all of a sudden they have to have credits because they're not meeting some of the standards, in our downtown project. And I think they would be interested in partnering with us if we had a wetland bank project. So that's the reason I brought that up.
True.
And a question I had is, let's say you had the 6 acres there, and we had a 4 acres somewhere else in the same district. Could you put those together as one wetland bank project?
President, Manager Morkenberg, I do not think so. We went through this banking project for the Helena Wetland Bank. I think you were at a presentation did a few years ago at the CAC. That was 80 acres, and we learned a lot through the process. And one of them, as we were looking for other opportunities, realized that particularly due to Army Corps restrictions, they don't like to see anything less than 10. It would have to be at one site rather than cumulative.
Kurt?
Troy, the gully stabilization, is that ditch 13 outside of Lydia, the Moen project, or is this something else?
Correct, it's the Moen project.
So that's not going to begin until late summer?
Sometime in summer, we're largely dictated by the weather conditions and the amount of water running through there. We want to pick a time of the year where you have the least amount of flow to worry about, and the best opportunity to do stabilization, that's typically late summer, is optimal.
Is that a 1 or 2 week project or what?
I would think about that, yeah.
And then the native grass planting, where is that going to be at?
That's located just west of Buck Lake, along, I believe that's Fergus Avenue.
Oh, Vergus Avenue? Okay.
Yeah, just south of
13.
13,
South of
right.
13, yeah.
And the new acres to be planted in cover grass, 7 new acres, where is it? Is that Rob Casey or who is that?
No, I believe it's Richard Clare. Is it Richard and
That
Barbara
sounds
Clare?
right, yeah.
Yeah.
The Claire on 282? Or no, that's a different Claire.
Yeah.
That's in the picture on your screen, the red highlighting, that's the
Just on the
property that's going into
southwest
cover
Okay.
crops.
Sutton.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a good thing you're here, Troy. This is
Yeah.
on the wetland restoration, can you help me understand, is that something that you're funding on your own or doing? Is this part of our current effort with you?
It would be part of the technical assistance and cost share program. So it's not large enough, as we discussed, to fall under a banking program. So we would, it would fall under one of our cost share practices where we provide a certain amount of incentive and a certain amount of cost share. The cost share is for construction. It covers roughly 90% of the cost of any construction work. The incentives run anywhere from $150 up to $270 an acre, depending on where it's located within the project.
But to clarify, this is an SWCD funded project.
It would be a joint funded project between the SWCD, we do have grant funds, and then we would match it and leverage Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District cost share funds, similar to the Moen one and other cost share projects.
So, and I don't want to get into, because I know your presentation is going to cover some of the things here, but just because this is brought up here. So traditionally, this board has been interested in funding projects that are having an impact on the phosphorus or the sediment. And this wetland restoration doesn't, or it's also not even talking about any reduction in that. So can you help me understand how this qualifies for a cost share from
Well,
us?
the reason I don't have any information about the phosphorus is just, again, like but just got brought up. I don't know if the landowner
Okay.
approached the soil and
Right.
water
So it's
recently.
maybe-
But we, like I said, we have quarterly meetings we will look at this restoration and we will rank it and code it to
Great.
make sure that it does meet all those criteria that the board is looking for before we approve this project. But it's just exciting to hear that there was a potential wetland restoration not
Okay, great,
Okay.
because that's part of what actually, one of my only questions actually for you here this evening, but it was brought up here, and so it sort of opened a door for me to talk about that, but, because I will sort of dig into that. I'd like to know a little bit more about what you did, but I'm going to wait till you actually have the chance to give your presentation, Troy. So, thank you, sir. Anybody else? Christian?
Yes, Jamie, I just have a question. The iron chloride treatment facility, first of all, good job getting it up and running, so it's working now, super. And one question I have is, when we had the engineering company give a report on the upper watershed district goals and so on, they analyzed the efficiency of the iron chloride plant, and I was surprised that they felt that it was less effective than we thought it was. And so I think it would be interesting to see is like what was their analysis and how did they get to that number? What do we think? But also what can we do to, and I know that's in the process, is how can we analyze the iron chloride facility and improve it? So I don't
Yeah,
know
if
you have
you're,
just
are
a
you
few
referring
words.
to the upper watershed blueprint study, the numbers that they included in that project? I would just simply say I don't agree with those numbers, so I think that our numbers are a little more accurate, so we can look into that more for sure,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yep.
I did want to mention too that one of the projects I don't have listed is the potential wetland banking project that we looked at in the Spring Lake West subwatershed. So definitely we need to circle back to that at some point. So that will definitely be a potential project in the future with banking opportunities.
How big is that wetland area?
Is it 11 acres, Carl?
Excuse me, I think the scenarios and potential ranges, including upland buffer, bring it up into the 20s, upper 20s for potential credit, maybe approaching almost 30, if I remember the number correctly. But strictly wetland, just flat out wetland restoration credit, not the buffer, yeah, that was smaller, around 10, plus or minus.
I think we're moving on to the next item then, correct?
Did you have?
Okay, it looks like, Troy, you're back up, sir, for your annual report presentation.
And just,
Are we not done? My apologies, I think,
just
Troy.
a real quick slide, education program. We had the part 2 of the Growing Healthy Soils event this last month, and we had good attendance. Again, we had 51 attendees, 2 different speakers, again, talking on a similar topic of conservation practices and cover crops. So that was a really nice event. And then wanted to point out that we'll be working with the Spring Lake Association to do lake vegetation identification training, and that date has been set for July 13th. We don't have a lot of other details on that yet, but just that we have a date. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you. No more, are there any more questions? Seeing none, then Troy, then the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Managers, it's good to be with you again. Happy to share the accomplishments for the 2021 year. And I'm going to, basically my presentation, just go over the highlights and then engage in a discussion and questions and answers, wherever that takes us. So the first thing I'll say is that I caution against comparing this report to last year's in terms of numbers you see. And the reason is we did a little bit of restructuring to recategorize things, and that's going to change where the numbers appear. The numbers themselves aren't different, but they're in different locations in the report and tallied. I'll start with the first page. These are just high-level metrics. Some of them are more interest to this board than others, but I think it gives a very good snapshot of that. The one thing this report does do is include 2020 figures, so you have a bit of comparison. Now, we're just going to build that so you can see trends over time and what direction things are going up or down. But anyway, the new request for conservation assistance, what that is landowners that have contacted SWCD or who we have contacted and targeted directly and have shown interest in pursuing a project, or some other technical assistance. So last year was 57, this year 53. The landowners assisted, these are not different projects, these are individual landowners, so there's 74. The reason there's more landowners assisted than the ones who requested is that they basically flow it and roll over into new year. So we might have 53 from this year, but we had 57 from last year. Many of those we are still assisting and working towards projects on. So that number is always going to be larger than the current year. We approved 20 cost share projects, completed 21. The number of phosphorus pounds per year reduced is 408 between all program areas. Sediment, 298 tons per year. Farmer-led council cover crops, 78 acres were seeded. Lake-friendly farms certified, 147 acres. And then you have stream flow measurements, water quality samples, and education events. So the report's going to focus on those middle set of items, the cost share program, with the large emphasis being, of course, on the phosphorus reductions.
Troy, if we had a question on that particular graph, would you
Yes,
like us
please.
to hold, or
I'm sorry?
would you like us to hold it until the?
No, actually, let's ask questions along the way, then we don't have to go thumbing back towards it, whatever the board wishes.
Could you clarify for me on the farmer-led council on the two items that you have here for just there, in 2020 and 2021? So for example, FLC cover crop seeded acres.
Correct.
So did we have a reduction in acreage seeded, or was that additional acreage seeded in 2021?
So there was 20 acres fewer this year than there were last year.
And is it the same thing then on the one underneath it?
Correct, correct. The one thing I would say about those two metrics is that the cover crop is an annual thing. So you do 500 acres this year, 600, it's not like you're doing 1,100 now. You're doing that many per year. Whereas the Lake Friendly Farm Certification Program, that's ongoing. So that's cumulative, so you did 425 last year and 147 this year, and we did some back in 2019. So those would all be cumulative then.
Right.
Because they're all in play.
Yeah, so so when we look at this kind of thing, you need to know whether it's a cumulative or not, or maybe you could
Yep,
put
and
that
when we
on
get to
there
that section of the report,
remind us, because just as I was looking at this, I couldn't, some of this stuff, anyway, questions.
that's the danger of high-level metrics.
Nope, it's okay, that's why we'll ask questions.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Thanks, sir.
It's great. So just for introductory purposes, our role is really to be here to assist the watershed district in implementing its watershed management plan. And as we've discussed over the last half a dozen years, or maybe more even, is that our priorities are whatever your priorities are. And we understand that fully. When we meet with Jamie, for example, and we look at projects, we look at one number primarily, and that is what are we getting for phosphorus reduction and how much is it costing. Sediment is a secondary, as well as runoff reduction related to fund control. So those are the three things we look at, with phosphorus being highest. Our areas of program engagement, there's about 5 main ones. One is the cost share program. That's where we're assisting landowners out in the watershed to do projects. The Farmer-led Council, of course. Water quality monitoring, some miscellaneous technical and regulatory services, and education. So that's the 5 areas. And you see that in the budget and in the agreements. So the work we do is based on that agreement. We have an annual contract, as you'll see in your packet today. There's a not to exceed amount there. We operate within that amount. A good portion of that is just for our services, and the other portion of it is pass-through funds. So those are actually monies going to landowners or for expenses in carrying out that work. We do provide quarterly reports, and those are connected with our invoices, so you see more detail at the quarter level, and this kind of rounds that all up into and rolls it up into a a single report, basically taking all that information throughout the year. So I'll jump into the cost share program unless there's any questions on that background. So the Soil and Water implements a county-wide technical assistance and cost share program. It's really a collaborative program that we do in all the watersheds throughout the county. We work with the WMO, the Vermilion River, Lower Min, and of course Prior Lake, Spring Lake. And each contributes to that program. What's nice about it, being collaborative, is that it's consistent. Landowners on one side of the watershed or road have the same set of rules largely as the one, across the street. And that's nice, and there's consistency and predictability in that. There are some nuanced differences in Prior Lake in terms of how we administer the program, but in terms of how a landowner would have experience, it's very much the same. The cost share program includes a number of things. One is just our technical assistance and working with landowners on a voluntary basis. We do that by just responding to them who voluntarily knock on our door or give us a call, looking for a particular help with a problem. But we also do targeting where we are intentional about where we go and knock on doors to seek projects that we know are a priority. So we really do both techniques, and one of our top goals in what we do day in and day out is build relationships and trust with landowners. We don't really turn anybody away. Whether or not the district pays for all the services we provide is a different matter because we don't charge for all the services. We really focus on the ones that are going to return a benefit to the district in terms of your priorities. But we're a service agency, so we don't, close our doors to some and help others. But in any way, we serve all the customers that come to us to one extent or another, and our goal is to build trust and relationships because that's how we're going to get projects on the ground and changes in behavior. We know that if landowners don't trust our message or our services, they're unlikely to receive our message of clean water and act on it. So we really work hard to do that on a daily basis, providing good customer services. So at the end of the day, though, it's about what do we get on the ground for the district, and that's what those graphs there represent. Those show the phosphorus reductions, and again, I'm comparing 20 to 21. You can see that the numbers aren't huge compared to a large capital project. They're small, but that's non-point source pollution, and working with landowners it's a little bit by little bit. In any event, you see a substantial increase, though the overall number is small, the increase is fairly significant. I would direct your attention more to the graph on the bottom of that page 9 to the one on the right side, because year to year, there's just high variability. You might see 1.7 in phosphorus this year or last year and 8.7, but you might see 100 next year. So you really have to look over a longer period of time to see trends and get averages rather than looking at a snapshot. So that's what that graph on the right side does. That's the total load reduction between 2016 and 2021. Now, what's included in that number is phosphorus reductions from projects that are still on the ground, still being operated and maintained the way they're intended. So that's what's happening year after year because of those projects we put in. Now, there will be projects, maybe you do a 1 year, like a cover crop might be a 1 year incentive. So you're paying for the reduction that year, but you're not going to get it next year unless you re-up that acreage. But these here are counting the cumulative phosphorus reductions from all the projects we've done. Yes, Manager Morkenberg.
A question I had is, so the 300-pound over those 5 years, what percentage of the watershed district acreage do you think has accomplished that? Is it 2% or is it 20% or just roughly speaking?
Mr. President, Chair Morkenberg, it's practically impossible to give you an answer to while some of these are acres and can be counted as a percent of the watershed, other are points. So it's really hard to know like what that base is. Is it all the acres in the watershed, and then what does this acreage represent, or how many points of erosion or concern are out there? You know, there's probably thousands. We just don't know where they all are, so I apologize, but I don't think I can give you a good answer.
The reason why I asked this is just are we at the beginning of doing this, or are we at 90% of where we could be, what we can do?
That's a different question. I would say that the best way that we gauge our progress is really the amount of phosphorus and sediment reduction we're achieving compared to what a goal might be. Is it the 2000 I forget what year the TMDL implementation plan is, but in that plan, it spells out what is a phosphorus reduction or sediment reduction goals. We can gauge progress towards meeting that more easily than saying, well, what percentage of the watershed is still out there to do something with. Another example where we might be able to measure trend or comparison is cover crop acreage or lake-friendly farm acreage. We know how many total agricultural cropland acres are in the watershed, and we can say every year, if we do a certain percentage of the acres, how close we're getting to canvassing all cropland within the watershed. So there's some things you can do it on, and other things it's kind of hard. You're welcome.
Bruce?
Yeah, Troy, on that graph there at the bottom of page 9, is that 300 pounds per year phosphorus reduction, or is that 300 pounds total for the flag?
It's per year, and these are largely locked into 10-year contracts. So when we say 300 per year, that's 300 per year for 10. So if all these, assuming all these were 10 years, now there might, I don't know the exact makeup of it, but largely they're 10-year contracts, so you can bank on that occurring every year for 10 years.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the reduction in 2020 and 2021 isn't very large. So did we have some really big years prior to that?
Correct.
And what was the reason for that?
Just different projects that have different benefits, you know, depending what comes up in every year. And that's why I say it's highly variable. We're going to get some years that we, you know, make a lot of progress, and other years we're building progress, so, yep.
Troy, I might dovetail into what Christian said, because I know also, well, Bruce and I have talked this, but I know Kurt's brought this up, and even recently behind the scenes. Just like you stated, like the cover crop, it would be great to see what percentage of coverage we have. And again, whether it's going up or down. And I know that's, even though you may be getting to that one, but some of this stuff doesn't show that we had any activity in 2021. So I think that is something that the board, you know, clearly is all expressed over time of a stronger interest in seeing some of those metrics.
Yeah, exactly, and I have that's good to know, and I think I would want to work with your staff on identifying what are we analyzing. You know, when we say coverage, for example, and we talk about a project being a native grass, well, we don't have necessarily a target for how many acres of native grass we want to do in the watershed, or how many acres of cropland we want to take out of production to do that. But we can say this practice is achieving this much reduction towards your goal. We know we're not going to convert all, you know, 5,700 acres of cropland into native grasses, so that wouldn't be a good metric to compare.
That one might not be, but I think the one Christian, and I know, again, Kurt's even asked that one too, on the cover crops.
Yep.
Probably 100% would be ideal.
Correct, and that is our
So
goal.
that is one that we
Yep.
can, rather than find the ones that we can't, let's go find the ones that we can.
And that's what is
do
in
make
here.
sense.
Yep, and that's what we do have
That'd be great.
very readily available.
Yeah, know that you can't always do it, but at least also then, even if it is a practice, if we can see if the quantity installed is growing or declining, or we're losing
Correct.
participation for some reason, to find out, hey, what's happening, what's working, or maybe it's not working.
Yeah,
Stuff,
and we'll get
right?
into that at the end a little bit.
There you go.
All right, we'll move on to page 10 then. On the top is a graph regarding runoff reduction. So that's one of the three parameters we do look at every project. Not every project does have a runoff reduction benefit. One of the best ones, actually, for example, is native prairie. Converting cropland to a deep-rooted native plants is tremendously great in terms of reducing not only phosphorus and sediment, but also runoff on an annual basis. So again, the amount of reduction achieved in 2021 is very small, but we had a few years in the past that were really good projects. And so that's why you see the bar discrepancy that you do, even given that it's a 5-year trend. So again, this is acre and in acre feet per year. Pass-through cost share expenditures. So this is still the cost share program, but it just gives you a snapshot on the amount of funding that is spent on projects. Now, this is not staffing. This is just the money that used to construct, install, and incentivize practices. So you'll see the graph there shows the same range of years from 2016 to 2021 and breaks apart the different components between landowner, Prior Lake, Spring Lake, your own funds, and funds that the Soil and Water bring to the table. So you can see it's a pretty good split between different sources. The watershed district isn't picking up all the cost of any of these projects. Generally speaking, you have landowner and Soil and Water grant funds that are also brought to the table. So essentially, I like to look at it as we're leveraging Prior Lake, Spring Lake funds to use state and other people's money. So we get more on the ground. And the cost benefit to the district obviously is much better when we can do that. And that's kind of one of the things of our entire program is we're always seeking other funding sources to bring to the table. Generally, I shouldn't say generally, for 2021, we spent about $42,400 on projects. About 27% of that was from the district, and the rest came from Soil and Water grants. That was 35%, and landowners themselves, which was about 37%. On a typical project, the landowner share would be anywhere from 20 to 30% would be more average. This year, we had a project where the landowner's contribution was larger than normal. Since 2016, over $270,000 has been spent on projects, about 20% from the district, 56% from the Soil and Water, and about 25% from landowners. So the breakdown is there in the graph for you to see. Any questions on that? Okay, so the results by practice kind of roll into the next page, 11. And there you'll see we break apart, kind of categorize them into two different areas. One being practices without benefits or measurable phosphorus benefit, and those practices with measurable. So you might ask, well, why would we do anything with no measurable benefit? So this gets into the discussion such as well decommission, right? We want to protect water. We can't really say there's a phosphorus reduction there, but it's an important part of your program. So well decommission is a practice that remains eligible inside of the cost share policies, so I want to report it. Nutrient management. So it would seem to be obvious that, well, if we're doing nutrient management, we should get nutrient reduction, measurable nutrient reduction. But trust me, we've researched and we've called experts to try to figure out, well, what is the actual benefit of working with a landowner or farmer on changing their nutrient management program. And getting those numbers is very tough because it all depends on what's in the soil, what they're doing now, what they're changing, and there's really no good way to measure that in any kind of runoff. The best information we got is that it's very small. Because what we're talking about here is a farmer switching from applying their nutrients in one way to applying that in another way. And it may or may not be more or less. For example, one of the key elements of nutrient management is really targeting where you put your nutrients and applying it variably depending on where the need is. So if the soil is really low in a nutrient, your application is actually going to increase. But if your soil background levels are really high, you might not put any. So over, 100 acres, it might wash out, but the point is you're putting the nutrients where they're needed, where they're not. You're not overloading some parts of the soil or field and underapplying in others. So it's a better nutrient management strategy. It's a encouraged practice, it's a best management practice, but again, figuring out what the nutrient reduction is on a per acre basis is not information we have.
So Troy, this was one of the areas, and you even highlighted why even look at stuff that's maybe not measurable, but just the comment that you made with respect to nutrient management. So I get that from a productivity of the farm perspective, but that's the way you spoke about it, not necessarily what it means to the watershed.
Yeah.
Because the watershed would care about the runoff, and the nutrient management from a runoff perspective could be diametrically opposed to what the farmer needs from a crop production, and I get that.
Very true.
So from our perspective, can you help us understand what this means from a watershed perspective, and maybe give us a sense for what did we pay for this? What's
Yeah.
our portion of this to help a farmer be more productive with his crop?
Scott, I'll have to call on you to remind me what our rate is for that, what we pay for it. But let me give you two instances where it's of interest to the watershed. And again, giving you solid scientific numbers, I'm not going to do that. But let's say in good scientific theory. Number one is a healthy crop is actually good for the environment because growing crops pull out more nutrients from the soil. They're producing better canopy cover, so they're actually going to reduce runoff. They're going to hold soil in place better. So if you have a healthy growing crop, just like a healthy lawn, you put fertilizer on an unhealthy lawn, it can't consume the nutrients. Those nutrients are going to more likely run off with the water or with the rainfall than a dense, heavy, well-growing turf, okay?
Sure.
It's going to use that nutrients, bind it up, and slow any kind of runoff. Same with cropland. So if you got better crops, you're going to have those benefits. The other is more related to the saturation level of the soil. So there's this threshold where when the phosphorus levels in the soil reach a certain level, they're more likely to then release soluble phosphorus. I don't know what the parts per million, it's something like 50 or 53, somewhere between 25 and let's say 50 parts per million. When you reach a certain point, that soil is more likely to release that excess phosphorus because it doesn't have the capacity to hold on to it. Those are very layman's terms because I'm not a scientist, but that's why you would want to see a nutrient management plan that would discourage placing more phosphorus in areas where it's already high. So those are two examples.
Okay, thanks.
I believe, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a study from the Discovery Farms, and they do some work. Discovery Farms in Wisconsin, do they have any here in Minnesota where they're studying that sort of thing? Where they're looking at phosphorus levels in soil, and they're actually doing some measurements to be able to make those determinations. So the last item on the list is turf conversion, and this is new, but the Watershed District was a partner in this project, even though they didn't contribute funding towards it. Manager Morkenberg was actually a participant in the Lawns to Legumes program, but we measured this in square feet. We had quite a few projects go in around Spring Lake there through a grant from Bowser. Again, this is not intended for necessarily measurable phosphorus reduction, but it is a conversion of general turf areas, which are fertilized and mowed and whatnot, to more native plantings, so, and natural landscape. Moving on to practices with measurable phosphorus benefits. So these are practices where we do, for each one, utilize the tools we have to come up with phosphorus reductions. We use a federal natural resource conservation tool or model called the Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation that helps us determine rates of soil erosion and loss of sediment and phosphorus. We also use models by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So those are two standard models that are used statewide to make these, or to come up with these estimates. So the intent of this table is to show what we installed for each of these practices in 2021, and then the cumulative installation from 2016 to 2021, along with the amount of phosphorus reduction that they generated, the district cost, and what the cost per practice was to the district in terms of phosphorus in pounds per year. So you can see the conservation cover is at 545, for example, per pound. Cover crops, 924, critical area planting, 51, and so on. So it just gives you a good reflection on kind of what you're getting for the cost share dollars. So I ran a little calculation on over the full 6-year period what all the costs were for all the practices we did. So in the past 6 years, we've utilized about $241,000 in district funds. So this is not soil and water funds or other funding for it, just what the district provided, including cost share that went to the landowner and all the time for our staff to work on the projects. 241 pounds, 300 pounds per year comes about $80 a pound over that term. If we look at total funding, so this is funding including that which we bring to the table, it about doubles it, so about $152 a ton overall. So the district's getting about a 50% reduction because of the partnership that we have. Any questions on that? I know there's probably
So Troy, and I get
confusion
why
there.
also on this one, it clearly looks like you want to focus on the long-term, what we've done, and it's good stuff. Don't take my question the wrong way, please, but it looks like it was a tough year to try and add new projects in all these categories. Can you maybe share with us what was challenging or difficult, or shed some light on the open categories for 2021?
I mean, we didn't really study it too deep. It is a natural thing. I mean, you have your years where you get a lot and some years where you don't get anything. That's just the nature of the beast. Honestly, Prior Lake Spring Lake is probably the most difficult area for us. For some reason, I don't know if it's in the water or what, but it's a tough sell in your watershed. And the Farm Bill Council has really helped that, and we've made progress, and I think things are improving, but it's always been a tough nut to crack with the landowners. And when we kind of talk about it, informally, we understand that this is an area of growth, and there's always this, like, do we really want to invest a lot into the land? Do we want to tie it up in a practice? So there's that growth pressure issue. But I couldn't really tell you exactly. But I do know that every year things like drought situation, that's difficult. The farm economy plays a role. I can tell you what's really good for soil and water, and that is when we have a good, strong rainfall that floods everything and washes things out. We get a lot of calls on those years, right?
They want to fix.
They want to fix it, right, and they can more visibly see the problem. But when you have a really light rainfall year, the evidence on the landscape is not as apparent, so you get less interest, and that's just how it goes.
Would it be worth spending a little time, both maybe brainstorming or talking at the FLC, on what you might need from us to try and change this and continue to grow these efforts to improve this? And what can we do to help from a board perspective,
Would love to.
staff or board, but,
Yep.
because this would be great to see this continue to go up. And I mean, I have become far more aware of what's going on because of my participation in the FLC. Immense education, and I know it hardly scratches the surface, but I've learned of the challenges. So, I mean, I get it, but what can we do to help here? So would love to hear back from you.
Troy, I have a question. So we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know in my line of work, it absolutely made a huge difference and completely changed many things, also economically and so on. So I would imagine it probably has affected how much you could talk to people, how you work with your staff, and so on. And one question, it probably is not relevant to ask that, but I was just wondering, were you able to get any funds to help sustain the payments of your staff and things like that during the COVID crisis, to retain them and so on? But that may not be relevant to ask that question right now, but if I should offer one thought about why 2020-21 was difficult, that probably was COVID crisis.
Yeah, and to your point, we actually, that first year of COVID, we had one of our biggest years ever. I mean, maybe not in Prior Lake, but countywide, our experience was we had more interest. It seemed like people were actually looking for stuff to do. 2021 was not a bad year either in terms of overall countywide for us, in terms of numbers, but we're kind of seeing a downward trend. So I couldn't tell you what that was, or if just initially it wasn't an issue, but as the pandemic lingered on, and now you have inflation and, costs of, doing anything is higher, those can all play into it. So it's just really hard to know how each one individually or collectively impact decision-making.
Joni?
So President Meiser, I just want to point out, because all these nice little footnotes, you could read this that, nothing happened in 2021 with cover crops, but actually you'll see later in the report that cover crops, there's two different funding mechanisms for cover crops. There's the technical assistance program, and then there's also the farmer-led council funding. And so you will see some funding coming through for cover crops through that program. So just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thanks. Bruce, did you have something? Bruce?
Yeah, just on the measurable phosphorus benefits, the cost benefit, I mean, when I run the numbers, the column that says district cost, that's the Prior Lake district?
Correct.
And then the pounds per phosphorus removal, that's a cumulative? Or?
Correct. So that's the benefit you get for over the term of the contract or life of the project.
Okay. So when I run the numbers, it's like $106 per pound. Is that correct?
For what then?
About $106 per pound of phosphorus removal over that period of time?
Total?
Yeah, if I take the number of pounds, or the district contribution of 31,000 divided by the number of pounds, is that a correct way of looking at this? Those
well,
numbers there just seem...
Not exactly, only because those are pounds per year, whereas the total is the total cost when you take that pounds per year over the effective
Okay.
life of the project.
So that is the pounds per year.
Correct, and that number is going to vary. You can't look at each one individually because some contracts might be 15, some might be 3, so it's hard to put all that into, all those play into the equation.
Should we keep having Troy move on with the presentation?
Okay, moving on to Farm-Led Council. We've been assisting the district since 2013, so we're coming up on 10 years strong with it. Really, we see the goal of the Farm-Led Council to expand adoption of conservation by working within the community that is interested in that particular area. Farmers mentoring other farmers, encouraging other farmers to do the same, and really guiding programming in a way they feel is most effective. And that's really been the approach since it started, is that they make the decisions on how they're structured, what are priorities, what they fund, and what kind of services we as Soil and Water provide. Since the inception, I think there's two programs that really shook out of it that are of most significance. One is the cover crop program, and the second is the Lake-Friendly Farm Certification Program. Two very measurable programs that yield benefits. Growing fast is also the no-till and reduced tillage component of it. That is not included, but I anticipate next year there'll be sufficient activity and progress to begin reporting that alongside these other two programs. But for this year, it's focused on the cover crops and the lake-friendly farms. I think in the interest of time, I'll just skip a lot of the wording there and go to page 12 and just talk to the graphs a bit. So on the top left graph, the orange one you'll see there, these are phosphorus load reductions from the Farm-Led Council programs. These are by year. So some of that, let's see. Yeah, so it includes both lake-friendly farm and cover crops. So some of this acreage continues, some of the benefit continues, others just annual. So just for comparative purposes, and I did have a graph in here that shows total over the total 5-year period, but decided not to include it because not all of that is cumulative. It's achieved on a per year basis. So again, these are load reductions and achieved in each of those years shown. So you have, in 2021, for example, almost 400 pounds of phosphorus and 290 pounds of sediment. Then the table below that kind of lays out the quantities for each of those two programs, the cover crop acreage. And the intent here is to try to get at, well, what are we achieving for phosphorus reduction and what does that cost benefit? So over the past, and I'm using 2019, 20, and 21, we did some program in 18, but how that was funded was very different than how it's been funded in the last 3 years, so I thought it was kind of an outlier. So this is just helping you understand the trends for the last 3 years. The amount of phosphorus reduction isn't shown here in total because I'm focused on 3 versus 4 or 5 years because I thought the data was better. So of the 1,721 acres achieved 954 pounds of phosphorus reduction. You see the district input was a little over 55,000, and the cost benefit being 58.12 pounds or dollars per pound. Lake-friendly farm certification, 784 acres total, achieving 284 pounds of phosphorus reduction, and you'll see the cost very small and the cost benefit very high. So that begs the question, why should we just do more lake-friendly farms? It seems the cheapest way to do it. What happens in lake-friendly farm certification is that the cost of changing isn't always something that we pay for. That is something that they do on their own or use other sources of funding to achieve. So in some cases, the fix is very small, like putting in water quality inlets in a tile in a critical area can have a huge benefit, but cost $25, you know. So you achieve a lot because the farmer's doing a lot of it on their own, not necessarily having a cost share project to associate with it, but these are what we can document. So we do want to continue to focus on program because it is, and it's quantifiable. We know exactly what the farmers are doing to get certified. We can quantify that, and we can quantify how much they're doing to get the question of coverage again. And that's what's shown down in the graph below. You can see on the right side, I'm kind of jumping here on you, but the lake-friendly farm graph on the right shows total acres. being 13.6%. So that's 13.6% of all productive cropland in the watershed. So that's getting at that metric. We want that to be 100% if we can. That's the goal. Then switching over to cover crops on the left side there, you'll see that those acres are what we achieve per year. So we see it grew from 18 to 20, took a little step down in 21. Next year could be big, it could be the same, it could be less. Our goal is to increase it though. Again, the goal is, at least in our minds, 100% cover crop usage. I don't think that's realistic, but it's certainly a noble goal. But you could easily look at how many acres were achieved there, divide that into 5,745 and, come up with what, 15% of the cropland or something like that. Our hope is to look really long-term at this. These are really short-term trends, and as I discussed earlier, we'd like to have 10 years worth of data to really be able to compare how well we're doing in any given direction on this. But I think overall, these are two very good program areas. They seem to be yielding very good benefit to the district in terms of phosphorus reduction. And the other thing about it is that not all conservation works are compatible with production ag. There's really a small segment of practices that we can incorporate into a production ag environment. And cover crops, nutrient management, reduced tillage, no-till, and some of the practices that are required for certification are all designed to be workable within that cropland environment. Mr. President, I think I'll just finish off by just kind of referring you to the summary of the budget on page 13. I just kind of give you a snapshot on where we landed with respect to the year. We had $124,000 in our contract. Again, that's a not-to-exceed amount. We billed 109 and 15,000 we did not spend. The SWCD contributed about $60,000 worth of services to district residents and to the district, and the landowners brought about almost $16,000 to the table. So I think it just reflects that we're kind of a good partnership. We're bringing different pieces of the puzzle to the table, making it work. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the budget for next year is about the same, pretty much the same as what you reflected here. I would say that well, it's kind of obvious the biggest part of this underspending was the $15,800 in the cost share. And that's reflected in my numbers. We didn't have a lot of projects to report on in terms of the cost share. So we didn't spend as much in that program area as we would have liked.
Great, thanks, Troy. And it is a good collaboration, always has been for all these years. Thanks for everything you do. Troy, before I see if my colleagues have a question, we've got our big projects in the upper watershed that we're trying to target. Is there a role for the SWCD to help us secure or work on these big projects? Have you chatted about that? Do you think you could help in some way?
I think so. I don't know if we had a long discussion about it, but I know when the plan was being developed, we were involved in that. And I believe in the implementation plan, there is references to soil and water having areas of ability to help out. I think particularly with landowner engagement, relationships, and really fostering projects would be an area where we could definitely contribute.
And that's a critical component that's been talked over and over again about us being able to engage them. And so that is the one I was thinking about when I asked that question. There could have been others, but that's why I asked it in an open-ended way. So, Joni?
President Meiser, we have already reached out to Soil and Water to help us with some of that initial reach out to some of the property owners, because they do have the trusted relationships.
Exactly. Yep, perfect. Okay, you're on it.
The last thing I could, if I might just go back to the Farm-Led Council for a second. As I mentioned early on, we're going into our 10th year next year. I think it would be a good time to take a look back and see what's been accomplished, assess what's worked, maybe what's didn't, and kind of make a decision about, well, what do we continue, what do we change or alter? That might be something we want to do formally at this point. Maybe this year or next year is really look closely at, well, how are we doing? Can we do better?
I think it's great.
So that's something maybe we would engage staff with and pursue.
I think that's a great idea. And probably the board too, I would assume. I know most of these guys would like to participate in that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else have any questions for Troy? Kurt?
Troy, I think you're right on the money when you're talking Spring Lake Township. There's lots of rumored development going on out there and a lot of searching around for property acquisition, not for farmer-led council, but for housing developments or that kind of thing. I think you're right on the money on that, absolutely, especially the northern part of Spring Lake Township. I think that's very much the case. So I understand that. I think farmer-led council is a fine organization. I just wonder down the road how much more room there is to capture things. You know what I mean? Was it 60% or 65% of the farmable land is limited to 5 or 6 farmers? Is that right?
I don't know, Scott, do you have maybe?
Does that sound?
Actually, ask Scott. He works with the
That
farmers
sound
out
pretty
there on a
close.
regular basis and maybe have a better, come on up, Scott, I guess. Kind of just speak to that, because that is an important point.
I mean, you gotta have a chance to.
Scott Schneider, Soil and Water. Yeah, we crunched a few numbers, just this afternoon to kind of take a look at things, and we actually had, this was from one of the meetings a couple of years ago, a map where we sat down with some of the farmland council and basically said, okay, who runs this, and, so now we know, I would say we're aware of over 90% of, who runs what land, and, just in looking at that, there's about 21 identified that run probably 90% of the land. 21 identified producers that run 90% of the land, and about 3/4 of them are actively working with us. Some of them, in different realms. We have about 7 of them that are coming along. There's some that we talked to a few years ago, and they didn't have any time for us. And then we keep, reaching out to them and talking to them, and some of it is, working with the next generation that's coming up and starting to farm. So we have one of them that runs a significant amount of land in the watershed that we didn't have any luck, and grandpa's good with conservation practices, the son isn't so much, and he's the one that's kind of running the show, and then the grandson is more into conservation practices. So now, just this year, we signed them up. I don't know if that's within the Prior Lake watershed, but we did get them signed up to do some cover crops and some no-till, which, if you would have talked to me 3 years ago, I would have said they're a no. They don't have any interest, don't have any time. So there's some of them that are coming along, some changeover in land. So some of the ones that we've been working with historically that, some of you guys have met, that are expanding some of their acreage, they're picking up new acres, some of them are getting out of it. So we got about 7 of them that are coming along. We got 5 that are kind of on the sidelines that we'll reach out to them, we send them mailers, but they just aren't there yet. But to the 7 that are coming along, a few years ago, and, like the one that I just talked about, it's a work in progress, and it takes, continuing to, I just met with one of them that I would consider to be on the sidelines. I just dropped a drill off for him yesterday and chatted with his son and said, hey, these are some of the things that we're doing as far as cover crops. They don't live in the watershed, but they farm a decent amount of acreage in the watershed. And, just started talking with the son about it, because I know he's had some interest in it. So we're trying to cultivate those relationships and work with them more. And yeah, I'd say there's one that I don't know if we're ever gonna get him to do it, but we'll see. I mean, his neighbors and, other farmers put a little pressure on him, but he's pretty pointed in what he does and how he does it. So I don't know if we're gonna gain any ground there. So, yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Troy.
I get it. Agreed. Thanks, Scott. All right, thanks, everybody. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items anybody wanted removed from the consent agenda? Bruce?
I just want to make note that I was not around for the March meeting, so I would abstain from that vote.
Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Motion is second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Thanks, gents. Our treasurer's report. Christian, you are up for the first time, sir. The floor is yours. And if you could pull that mic down just a little bit closer.
Yep. Just read what's on the sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Here, you looking for this? Oh, you
Oh, I got it here.
Christian, could you pull that mic a little bit closer to yours? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Yes, so I believe the status of the watershed district looks good so far as there's balance between revenues and expenditures. There's no surprises in what comes out. The results that we have. We have 1.4 million in Old National Bank, 174 in Sterling Bank, and 380,000 in Northland Securities. We have our restricted funds that are for specific projects that are held, and we have about $1 million there. So total, we have about $966,000 available cash as of this month here. We have our long-term project graphs that is outlined for the managers to see, and as you can see, as we go through the spring, our cash reserve decreases until we get rejuvenation and the funds from our tax levy. And I think the big thing that's coming up is transitioning to 4M as our new bank, and establishing our relationship with the U.S. Bank to help manage a lot of things. We are looking at working on paperless checks, trying to streamline as much as we can. And then, of course, as we discussed today here, we're looking at the potential for bonding so that we can fund some of the bigger projects, and to make sure that if we do it, how do we do it best? How is it most affordable? And as we especially think the second presentation we had today had a very good outline for how you actually go about funding it. And the watershed district have tried it before and paid it all off. So this is one thing we'll be looking at, whether that's advisable while we are looking to get grants to pay for the projects. I think that's about it.
Great. Thanks,
Any
Christian.
question?
Any questions for Christian? Seeing none, actually, I just have one, Joni, maybe I would ask you, I think, over Christian on the final one, on this cost analysis, that final page in the treasurer, the quarterly financial one. I think I know we've asked in the past if we could get some context and put in like the previous year. It's probably most valuable to see like year over year.
President Meiser, yeah, we certainly
Would that be
can.
possible to ask CLA if we might do that when they pull this together to get?
Certainly. So would you like to see, a comparable, like this is the first quarter, so comparable first quarters for last year as just a point of
I
comparison?
think that would be great. Ideally, when this is sort of less meaningful in a first quarter, as you can sort of see this data. But clearly, like year-end stuff, it becomes more valuable, and especially if we have a comp, comparable, so we have context to see what we're looking at and see where we're trending. I think that'd be great.
President Meiser, I'll work with CLA and we can revise this report so that we can provide that information.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Joni. Okay, I think that's it. Then we're going to move on to upcoming meetings. I will just share with everybody that we have a Board of Managers retreat this Saturday from 9 to noon at City Hall in Parkview Conference Room. Somebody else want to talk about the CAC meeting? Bruce, you're our liaison. You want to?
Sure. We're going to have our meeting on April 28th from 6:30 to 8 in the Park Lake City Hall Wagon Bridge Conference Room.
Kurt, our last
And
one.
then the Board of Managers' next meeting, as always, the second Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. Next month, it's May 10th, and it's right here in the Prior Lake City Council chambers.
Thank you. So the final item, anyone want to make a motion to adjourn, or you want to just stay here?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0 unless, Frank, are you a 5? Are you a yay? You want to adjourn?
He abstained again.
Okay, you did. I'm just checking on him. Great, that's a 5-0. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
I had to abstain.